Hello. Hi, everyone. Sharon, Catherine, Susan. So far, it's just the four of us. Hopefully, more viewers will be able to join. And this is being recorded, so it's not going to be an issue to watch the recording at your convenient time, as well as the other tours, Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov for my Jewish friends. Before we get down to the tour, which is going to be the part two of the Paris leg of the trip of Russian immigrants. And once again, by Russians, I mean all the, let's say, subjects of the former Russian Empire. And my focus will be Russians per se, Jews and Georgians, and how the faiths interconnected. It's not correct to say just white immigration because white immigration refers to, hi, Maria, it more refers to the army, right? Which is big part of the Russian immigration, especially in Paris. But it's not only the military, it's people of all walks of life, of uh, different professions, different backgrounds. So it's way more diverse than just white army, but that's the modern day term. That's the common term that everyone at some point agreed to use with regards to the immigrants of after 1917. So the previous episode is still available on my YouTube channel to catch up. Hi, Dorley. Good to see you. Before we get down to the tour, as usual, let me share with you the links. There are a bunch of them. So first of all, the links for tonight. My Signahi live stream, which I did a few days ago, is available. I know I normally live stream on weekends, but that was a one-off thing, and that was a beautiful tour with a lot of unplanned things. I love live streams because they are unpredictable, because anything can happen. Sometimes bad things happen, sometimes good things happen. I've been quite lucky so far, and it's mostly been good things. So I got adventurous. We were able even to live stream from a medieval dungeon. Who would have thought there would be a signal there, right? I had zero hope on this, but it worked out fine. So the recording is there. Then just about 2 hours ago, I wrapped up my live stream from the vintage market, and some of you were with me there. And I was actually asked to not to film by the security, but I didn't take no for an answer. So I took off my phone from the gimbal. I turned off all the headset, and I went there just with the phone in my hand, and we got to film a lot of great stuff. And we got to meet some local designers, and I was even given a gift, which which I'm really, really touched about. I still feel they needn't have done that, but it's very kind of them. So I'm going to follow the store. I'm going to thank them for the generosity. And so that tour was lovely. I enjoyed it very much. I like to play it by ear. I like the live streams for this for this for these twists and turns. So also immediately after I'm done with this tour, I'll be taking you to the Museum of Soviet Communal Apartments, located in a palace. Because even communalkas in St. Petersburg look like palaces, at least from the outside. We'll see what's inside though. And also after 1 hour break, I will be taking you on a boat cruise in St. Petersburg. Obviously a pre-recorded video filmed a couple of years ago by a videographer of mine. So you know him very well. Hi, Maria. Then, what we are doing tomorrow, if you are subscribed to my newsletter, and most of you are, well, then there is one tour that was not added in the newsletter, which I added basically last night. I'll be starting with the Cheese Festival tomorrow, 30 minutes earlier than today. For some of you, I know it's a bit too early, but the recording will be there, so it's okay. Then I'll be talking about Agrippina Vaganova, the great ballet teacher, uh, famous all around the world. And exactly after her, the best ballet school in Russia was named. So Vaganova is a big deal. Then Misha will be talking about Soviet summer Soviet style, summer holiday Soviet style, uh, different kinds of leisures that the Soviet people could have. with propaganda, well, through the party for sure. So we'll talk about it. And I'll be taking it to Jerusalem, Western Wall tunnels, hopefully for the final episode. But this is not the end of my Jerusalem tours. Oh boy, that's not the end. And quickly sharing some links for the next weekend because a bunch of them are already there. I'll be talking about the walls and gates of old city of Jerusalem starting from next weekend. There's a lot to talk about. So it's going to be only the first episode, same time, Sunday night, my time. What was left behind the scenes in Signahi, where there was zero connectivity, is going to be shown on Sunday as well in my pre-recorded tour from Signahi. Then White Nights cruise with bridges opening next Saturday. And then I'll be taking it to another Romanov's palace on Saturday. And next part of the Russian exodus. Again, Paris. Mostly the story about the spies and murders by KGB in Paris. That's going to be next time. So this is it. Sorry for the lengthy intro, but this is the first proper tour of tonight when I have time to fill you in about what's happening next. And let's get down to the tour. We've spoken about different social groups of Russian immigrants that settled in Paris. We also spoke about why Paris became the center of Russian immigration because most of the immigrants, I mean, not of, let's say, of the, uh, well, okay, aristocrats, merchants, um, politicians obviously knew French very well, and they felt, I would say, more comfortable in Paris because many of them had been to Paris multiple times. But not only that, it's also that France provided great work opportunities just because the country had been trying to recuperate after the First World War. There was a great demand in the workforce, and there were two big car factories, Citroën and Renault, that had dozens of thousands of Russian workers working for them. Also, we spoke about writers such as Ivan Bunin, at that point would be Nobel Prize winner. And we spoke about some politicians. So speaking of Pavel Milyukov, whose picture I've been showing you for a while now, you may remember him from the Berlin trip because Milyukov, who was the former minister, who was the former member of the provisional government as well, and before that, the Duma member, the Russian parliament member during the times of during the imperial times. So Milyukov had to flee from the Bolsheviks, otherwise he would have been killed. There's like 300% probability that he would have been killed, so he had to flee. And there were several attempts to get rid of him already in immigration. And that's exactly one of the cases when two monarchists attempted to kill Milyukov, but it resulted in the death of Vladimir Nabokov Sr., father of the Vladimir Nabokov. That's the father who was killed in Berlin. And but Milyukov didn't have a scratch, and he left for France, where he got involved in the issuing in the editing a big newsletter, "Последние новости," like the latest news. And in Berlin, it was another newspaper that was called Rule, the steering wheel. So Milyukov was quite, I would say, had a kind of a creative spark, and he definitely had a good business flair because the newspaper they had at that time they were released, they were printed so many newspapers that would well, fit different kinds of audience. And normally their audience was quite segmented because there were multiple let's say political parties that had to flee after the Bolsheviks. Also, people of different social class would be reading different newspapers. So there were a lot of them. It was a great variety. And Последние новости, the latest news, had some of the biggest number of copies sold um, all around Europe, not just Paris, by the way, because it was published in Russian and then it would be sent elsewhere from Paris. That's Milikov and his wife. So they were doing actually very well in Paris. He obviously kept in touch with Russian politicians. This is I think, very recognizable character. This is Kerensky, Alexander Kerensky, who was the former president of the head of the provisional government who had to flee from the country. There are a bunch of stories, legends of how he had to dress like a woman to escape from the Bolsheviks, which is obviously just fake. But indeed, he had to go through a lot in order to escape, because he would have been the first one that Bolsheviks would want to get rid of. That's, again, 300% guarantee. So he managed to escape, and at some point I really think I should do a tour about him, as well as about some few other characters I will be talking about today and have already spoken. So one step at a time, definitely one step at a time. So I would say that most Russian politicians were doing quite okay, because they could easily find the like-minded fellows in Paris. Paris was the center of I would say everything: the opposition, the progressive thought, the art world. That's, I guess, natural. That's what we expect from Paris. And speaking of, let's say, media, but not the news media, fiction books. I would say publishing in general was some of the most lucrative businesses, and many Russians were involved in this. Other than manual work, other than some smaller businesses, but because there was a great deal of people who could read and write in Russian, and there was no need to translate any of that. So the современные записки, like contemporary, notes, something like that. That's how you could translate that. It was a big journal, like a big almanac of fiction stories from different writers. And because there lived so many great writers in Paris, that was never really a problem to get enough content. And the journal would be every time 400 pages, 600 pages, and it would be all fiction, some short stories, some chapters of novels that would be released. Well, the original plan was to release a journal per month, but the problem was there was always enough content, but very, very little funds to pay for the literature works to writers, and that was a big deal. Unfortunately, this is when the publishing committees had to resort to crowdfunding, so donations. You see, it's not the thing of today. So it was 100 years ago was exactly the same. And one of the Russian immigrants who managed to take publishing and publishing business, and also industry, and also journalism, to raise the bar on journalism, was Mark Vishniak, who was Jewish, immigrant from the Russian Empire. This is the photo from the Wikipedia. As you can see, he was a member of Russian Constituent Assembly. And as you know, with the Constituent Assembly, there was already, unfortunately, the Constituent Assembly never really gathered. It never really assembled because the plan was for the assembly to come about in January 1918. But in October 1917, the provisional government was stormed by the Bolsheviks, and that never happened. But there had been already a committee. There had already been some preliminary work, and they already knew who would be the members of the assembly. And Mark Vishnak was supposed to be there, um, without a doubt. He already had been a big journalist, already been involved in a lot of media outlets, so to speak, or different journals and newspapers. Yes. So with Vishnak, when he came to Paris, he was on the editorial board of the journal, and Современные записки, well, despite the fact that the journal was incredibly popular among the Russian-speaking audience, the money was still not enough. It would be purchased regularly and it would be a sold out, but the money still would never be enough. So this is when Vishnak also managed to find sponsors for the I would say more or less regularly released journals. Not just Современные записки, there were other journals they were involved with, but I'm not talking about the 1930s much yet. Obviously, we always have to keep in mind that we're talking about 1920s mostly. In 1930s, things started to change when Hitler came to power, especially with regards to Jews. So Mark Vishnak, he like many, by the way, managed to escape to the States. I don't remember the exact year when it happened. Hold on a second. One of the viewers is not able to. I'm not sure what happened. She's not able to join. So let me just send her the direct link. Sorry, I'll be quick. So, okay, I hope she will be able to join us. So eventually, in the 30s, he managed to escape to the States. I know it was shortly before. I would say shortly before it would become already very difficult to escape from the country. So this must be somehow the second half of the 1930s that he managed to come to the States, and there quite quickly almost immediately he started to write different reports and articles for Time magazine, and eventually he became on the editorial board of the Time magazine. So that's Mark Vishnak, I would say from the outskirts of the Russian Empire, this Jewish boy and then Jewish man of great potential with clearly creative spark, with a business talent, managed to become in charge of some of the biggest media in the States. And at that time, clearly one of the biggest media in the world. So that's quite impressive. But with regards to Современные записки managed to stay afloat thanks to Vishnak, because he would be the one who came up with the idea to, okay, let's arrange that, let's throw this crowdfunding thing, let's go find sponsors. And that's exactly the Современные записки that many writers managed to at least provide for their families, including Ivan Bunin, whom we already know from the previous episodes, not just Paris, because Ivan Bunin originally came to Turkey. We spoke about him in Istanbul. Then we spoke about him on some other tours. Now he is in Paris. Vladimir Nabokov would be also published in Современные записки. the Vermenzapiski had no um, didn't have funds to pay well. They were like the top rated writers, yet they were paid very little. And Mark Vishniak often had to um, find support from whom? That's interesting. Mostly from the Russian Jewish community. They were. I will speak about shortly about one of the representatives of this very um, very rich Jewish businessman who saved a bunch of poets and writers from literally, I would say, starvation. Because these people, unfortunately, like Nabokov, like Marina Tsvetaeva, as we spoke about her, and we'll be when we had a tour about Prague, and we'll speak more about Marina Tsvetaeva soon in one of the coming episodes. It's a very sad story, unfortunately. Marina Tsvetaeva is one of the greatest Russian poets of the 20th century. Nabokov, I guess, doesn't really need any more introduction, as well as Ivan Bunin. But anyway, um, they were also published, and also because Современный Записки was not about politics. People of different views, different political views were published, such as Alexei Tolstoy. We spoke about him when we had tours about Berlin. So Tolstoy eventually returned to the Soviet Union, and he uh, had to comply with the demands of the party, and he agreed, and he was so loyal to the Bolsheviks that he was even allowed to travel to Europe to keep contact with Russian immigrants. And who knows? It's hard to tell whether he was a spy. Most probably not, but because he did enough already with his literature. Whatever the party wanted him to write, he did. But he was a good writer, so that's why the contemporary notes of the Записки published a lot of his short stories. He was a very good writer, regardless of his political views. But originally, when he left for Berlin, then for Paris, and a few years after that, like in 1925, 1926, he went back for the Soviet Union. Another writer, which I don't think will really ring a bell to you, whose name I don't think will ring a bell to you, Alexander Kuprin, is a Russian writer, mostly known for his novel Granite Bracelet. Uh, Beautiful drama story, great language, good translations. I got to read some of the short stories by Kuprin. And he, when the revolution happened, had already been a very, really accomplished writer, well respected. He was quite well off and in great demand. He had normally multiple stories in the working. This is him enjoying the company of Shalyapin, the one of the best opera singers in the world at that time. Again, made known in Europe first by Diaghilev, and then he would be he would basically storm opera stages around the world. Eventually, he would also immigrate. And the problem is that Kuprin, he at that time lived in Gachina. This is where Nicholas II also spent his childhood with his family. We had tour in Gachina, and hopefully in a few months from now, I will be able to take you to Gachina again with World Virtual Tours. So you'll be able to catch up on the tours you missed about the childhood of Nicholas II and his siblings, about the family life of the courts at that time, not the glamorous, pompous parties and scandals, but the actual quiet life of a family, just a family, without this royal thing. Well, in a way. So when the revolution, let's say, when the Bolsheviks started to come to power, well, started to seize power from the provisional government, he lived in Gachina. And um, at that time, Kuprin even wanted to cooperate with the Bolsheviks because he was not a monarchist, and he, like many, originally welcomed the revolution, but he welcomed the, let's say, the bourgeois revolution, the first revolution, right? So before the power was seized by Bolsheviks, but when Nicholas II abdicated and the provisional government came instead of instead of the monarchy. So originally the plan was even to partner, to help, to be in charge of the one of the big newspapers, which was a very was a big deal because there was no internet, there was no TV, and the Bolsheviks used published media, the newspapers, leaflets, books, whatever, for their purposes. So it could have been something absolutely indispensable, but the for some reason this didn't really work out, and then Gachina was stormed by the White Army, and he joined the White Army because he quite quickly realized that the Bolsheviks would not probably be the force that he would go along with. So eventually he joined the White Army, and then he obviously had to flee because everyone knew Kuprin, and he would have been uh, killed quite quickly. And he was a very good friend of Ivan Bunin. And Bunin was the one who helped Kuprin escape with one of the last ships from from Russia. Kuprin came to Paris, and well, he struggled. And unfortunately, Kuprin never really got his mojo back. That's that wasn't because he didn't have anything to write about. He was stressed, and different people react to stress differently. Some writers found a great source of inspiration in their homesickness, in their uprootedness. But um, he never. So this is just the quotes. It's a translation from the quotes from his diary and some of the letters he sent to his friends. There is no day when I do not dream of Russia. I see the birches, the snow-covered fields. I hear the bells ringing. I'm dying for this longing. Paris is beautiful, but I feel like a tree uprooted from my soil. I long for the quiet of the Volga, the smells of spring, the sound of Russian speech. So he tried several things. He tried even to get involved in the publishing business through Bunin and Bunin's connections with Vishniak and others, but eventually it didn't work out. However, well, he was already in his 50s when he came, and I don't mean to say that age, is the decisive factor, obviously not, but when you are already an accomplished someone and you come to the new country, it's not easy because you have to start from scratch. When you're younger, it is easier. So his daughter, Ksenia Kuprina, you may have heard of her as Kisia Kuprin. Well, if you're interested in silent movies, then you must have seen some of the movies. She's, she was involved. She was filmed in. So she originally, well, she first became a model, like many beautiful ladies would back in the days, and then also, like many, switched to cinema. So in the movies, uh, I don't remember how many films she was in, but definitely more than five. This is just This is from YouTube. Pearl, the name of the film, 1929. It's a silent movie. So that's why it wasn't really a big issue for Russian immigrants to to find a job in the movies, provided that they had well, some other talents required for this industry. It wasn't the problem. The problems would start when the sound movies came about, because most of those Russian models and actors had a very strong Russian accent. So that's what happened to many eventually. Well, Kissy Kuprin was quite a she was quite a successful actress. She had uh, well, she clearly was more successful than her father, and she even introduced her father with some of the screen for some of the screenwriters and everything. He even tried himself. He was going like they arranged to write the script for some film, but well, it never worked out eventually. So, unfortunately, Kisia Kuprin did much better than her father, because Kuprin eventually went back to Russia, but we will talk about it much later. Speaking of models and actresses, I have spoken before about some of these Georgian ladies who, well, they were not just pretty faces, but first and foremost, back in Russia, they were uh, creme a la creme, right? They were the aristocracy. Mary Rashidze from the old aristocratic king in Georgia. She was a lady in waiting for the Russian Empress, for Alexandra Fedorovna. This is the photo of her as the lady in waiting. Melita Cholakashvili, she was also from a noble family. I'm not talking about, let's say, average Georgians. I'm not talking about peasants. I'm talking about the high society. Melita Cholakashvili, well, she came to Paris. What could she do? So both Mary Rashidze and Melita Cholakashvili, they became models for Chanel. Mary Rashidze was the first Russian model for Chanel, and Cholakashvili and her daughter would be the models for Chanel, for Lanvin, and Yves Saint Laurent, and some other brands. And obviously, I showed you the portraits of Melita Cholakashvili and Mary Rashidze by Savely Sorin, a Jewish-born Russian Jewish artist who escaped from Russian Empire before the revolution to Tiflis, and from Tiflis to Paris. And his portraits can be found in the royal in the collection of the British royal family, of the Monaco royal family, and many other private collections in the state. So if you missed the tour on Savely Sorin, the recording is available for my sponsors. And, if it's just one or two tours you would like to watch, just contact me. I can easily send you the link, and it will be sorted. So I shared the stories and details with you, so I'm not going to stop on this. I would say I'm not going to dive into details, but we still haven't spoken about the Georgian politicians. Um, that's basically because, again, Paris became the hub of the political life of the Russian nobility, um, including Georgia. Well, at that point, it was no longer Russian. So I guess let's first of all have, since we're doing two tours back to back, I suggest we skipping the short Q&A now and having a proper Q&A in the end. So let's do it like this. So I don't want to be late for the next tour, which is going to be an interesting one about the communal apartments. So this is the self-portrait of Sergei Sorin. And now speaking of Georgians, and it's incorrect to say that at that point Georgia uh, had been yet part of the Russian Empire. No, after the empire collapsed, Georgia gained its independence. And um, it formed the republic, and it was well, basically it existed for several years, for a little bit over 3 years, and Tbilisi became this, I would say, this hub of Russian immigrants because, well, not everyone had opportunity to go to the Crimea, so they would go to Tiflis. And I will be doing a tour about the Russian immigration in Tiflis. It was quite interesting and unexpected, and I hopefully will be able to show you something I wasn't able to, haven't been able to show you still. We'll see. We'll see. I'm just not sure, not sure if it will be done like in a live stream mode or in a pre-recorded format because of the let's say accessibility issues and the connectivity issues in some of the places I am hoping to show you on those tours. So anyway, Georgia gained its independence in 1918, and later on there was even uh, established the national government of Georgia. Um, that's by the way the flag of the Georgian Republic, and so the national government. But it didn't last long because in eventually 3 years later, the Bolsheviks invaded Tiflis, and the members of the national government of Georgia, well, they knew that they would become after. The head of the government and the first prime minister of Georgia was Noe Ramishvili. You see, he was in office for well, for a very short period of time as the prime minister. So then he would be the head of the government and the first, so to speak, the sort of a president of the Georgian government. So eventually they decided to flee. They had to. They didn't have any other choice. So so to speak, the head of the Georgian government in exile would be Noa Jordania. Actually, she was the head of the Democratic Party, and then he became in charge of the Democratic Republic of Georgia that was created in 1918, shortly after the revolution, when Georgia became independent. So eventually, he became sort of the face of the Georgian Republic in Europe, before the exile and after the exile. He became the face. He became the face of the resistance, and he determined, let's say, the strategy for the fight of Georgians against the Bolshevik government. They were still there is every city, every town in Georgia will have a street named after Noa Jordania. Well, Noa Jordania was just a great speaker and a diplomat. So here he is in Paris in 1920. There was some international conference, and Georgian government, Georgian Republic that was created in 1918. It was recognized by Europe. It was recognized by the way, I think this is their flag. Yeah, it is. It is the flag of the Georgian Republic, and it was recognized by the French. It was recognized by the British. I should probably give a tour about the Georgian Republic. That's Georgian Democratic Republic. That's an incredible phenomenon, which was very short-lived as well. So uh, dozens of Georgians, members of government, they had to flee. And well, some of them would first go to Turkey. Most of them would go to Turkey first because from Batumi by sea they would go to Turkey, to Istanbul, and then elsewhere. Some would spend some time in Berlin, but eventually everyone would try to be as close as possible to Noor Jordania and Noor Ramishvili, and that was Paris. Berlin um, was that's a question why, by the way, they decided not to stay in Berlin, but eventually it was decided to settle in Paris, not far from Paris, by the way. And that's an interesting story. So, by the way, this is Noor Jordania. I found this online on YouTube. There is the video of Noor Jordania. You have Justin Ramishvili and Rich Coney and the fellow members of the government in Tiflis. It was some sort of a celebration of, I guess it's 1918 or 1919. The video has no sound. This is the streets of Tiflis, Tbilisi. I think I even recognize where this is, but there's no point in. And the Constituent Assembly of Georgia. By the way, I really like the emblem of it. There were many members of the Constituent Assembly, and almost all of them, so almost all these dozens of people, they eventually came to Paris. So February 1921, the Bolsheviks invaded. That's the photo of the Red Army in the streets of Tiflis. This is not far from the how shall I put it? How shall I explain? For those of you who watched the tours of Rustaveli Avenue, that's not far from the Rustaveli Avenue, the main avenue of the city. So they they stormed in the country. Most of the members of the government managed to hop on the Ernest Renan ship in Batumi that was provided by France, and they left. So because most of them left on the ship, and it was a French ship eventually, they just came to Paris. Eventually, they came to France. But as I said, not all of them, but eventually those who decided to go elsewhere would move to France. And it was decided by Noor Jordania because they also had some money with them. They had some reserve with them. They decided to use the money for the good of the community and of the government. So they decided to purchase the estate in Leuville-sur-Orge, in the commune Leuville-sur-Orge, and they made it their headquarters, the headquarters of the Georgian Democratic Republic in exile. That's the estate, Leuville-sur-Orge. This is some 19th century postcard. And that's where many of them would be living. Noor Jordania himself, Noor Ramishvili, who was basically the first prime minister of the Georgian Democratic Republic. And then when the proper government was elected, so he became the president of the first government of Georgia. However, not for long, because when in Paris, he was killed by the KGB. Just point blank, in the light of day, in broad daylight. And that was it. He was done with. The Bolsheviks were really angry with the Georgians. So when the Bolsheviks eventually came to Tiflis, and they were well, the Georgians were fighting. Georgians were, trying to, well, to push the Bolsheviks away. That never really worked. So many Georgians died, and they were brutally killed in the. I showed you that building on a Halloween tour, not far from Rustaveli Avenue. There was a building that was made well, let's say not the headquarters, but one of the offices of KGB. And that's, well, the future KGB. At that time, it was like extraordinary committee that dealt with the treason and spies and everything. So those people would be brutally done away with. So that was the story. Some Georgians attempted to go back, and that didn't work out. Unfortunately, they were also killed. It really deserves a separate tour, maybe even a couple of tours. I'm now reading a good book on it in English, by the way. When I finish it, I will be able to recommend it. I want to finish it first, but I'm enjoying it so far, and it looks legit. It looks reliable. So I hope you will find those tours interesting when I am ready for them. Not at this point, but not all the Georgians um, decided to go. Not everyone. Many stayed, and many unfortunately died from natural causes in Georgia. There is a cemetery, a Georgian cemetery in Loville, not far from Paris, by the way. It's just a distant, just a kind of a train ride, about 1 hour train ride now to Paris around that time. I haven't been there though myself. And in the cemetery, well, this is the grave of one of the journalists and writers. And on the grave, there are several graves with such inscriptions saying that even my bones are longing for Georgia. During the term of Mikhail Saakashvili, the former Georgian president, it was agreed that the state would be returned to Georgia, and it required um, a lot of restoration work because the state was not really in use. And as far as I know, the estate belongs to Georgia now, the Loville sur Orge. So that's the story. So that's why now you know that the Georgian government and Georgians in exile, it's a little bit different story. It's not exactly correct to call them, well, to even include them in this list of the Russian émigré movement. But in my defense, I would just like to say that they fled from the same threat. They fled from the same enemy. And it is true that a lot of Russian activists, anti-Bolsheviks, um, worked closely together with some Georgians. That is true because I guess the enemy of my enemy, I guess that's how it worked. So it was centralized. The Georgian government in exile was centralized. It was um, a very tight community, very active, very passionate, and just like Russians, they were absolutely convinced that the Bolshevik regime would fall apart around those days. Let's put it like this. And it's not like many Russians would just passively saying, "Oh yeah, one day I will go back," but they tried to do everything to go back. They plotted scripts. They elaborated gazillions of plans on the return and storm of the Bolshevik government, but eventually none of it worked out. So, and many people died because of that. Many Georgians died, um, and well, without an opportunity to go back. There was an opportunity to go back, by the way, but very few used that opportunity because they probably knew what they were coming for. And yeah, those activists would have been definitely killed, 100%. But speaking of the writers, as I said, Bunin created the committee of the writers in 1920. That's also when some of his first short novel books was released. But Bunin and all other writers were struggling. They were, well, it's not like they were starving, but they were uh, definitely they didn't have enough food. They couldn't provide for their families, and these people couldn't go to work at a factory. That was out of question. So there wasn't really much to do. And this is when Vishniak, according to several sources, let's put it like that. I haven't been able to find, if, let's say, where it is directly written that it was exactly Vishniak that introduced Bunin to Leonid Rosenthal, but several articles in Russian suggest that it was through Vishniak and the Современный Записки journal that Leonid Rosenthal, who was the Jewish Russian merchant, the pearl supplier, the pearl manufacturer, well, the pearl supplier, uh, contacted Bunin and several other Russian writers and poets and offered them a monthly payout of 1,000 francs just because. Who was this Leonid Rosenthal? I think we speak about him and then we'll have a short Q&A. Well, a Q&A and then I'll be switching to the next door on the communal apartments. So Leonid Rosenthal, he originally came from Vladikavkaz, which is the area very close to the border with Georgia. At that time, it was part of the Russian Empire. According to some documents, he was born in Dagestan in a Jewish family, so he was a Jew. And uh, Rosenthal uh, immigrated from the Russian Empire before the revolution, a few years before the revolution. And when the immigrants started coming, such as Bunin and many, many others, Rosenthal had already, well, when he immigrated before the nationalization of the property. So he had all his funds secured in the European banks, and his property belonged to him. So it, technically speaking, there was nothing that connected him to the Russian Empire, just his roots and his love of Russian literature, Russian arts, Russian legacy, heritage. So the legend has it that Rosenthal, as a boy, worked at a restaurant, and he found a pearl in an oyster. So he just worked at a restaurant. That was it in probably in Odessa, and he found a pearl, and that's when he realized he had always wanted to be the pearl supplier or jeweler, and that's how he eventually, when he immigrated to the well, first he left to St. Petersburg and he worked for several jewelry homes in St. Petersburg. Then he immigrated to France. In France, he worked for Baccarat. Hope I pronounced the name right. And eventually became a he got introduced to several pearl suppliers in India, and he figured out how to he found a new. So okay, back in the days, most the pearl suppliers would be coming from Latin America and Brazil, but he somehow got in contact with the Indian divers, or for pearls, but it wasn't easy to deal with them. So eventually, he figured out that the Indian pearl divers liked the coins, not the paper money, but the coins. But they were so unwilling to work with a European, so he came with uh, dozens and dozens of big sacks full of silver money, silver coins. And this is when the divers started calling for their colleagues. And this is when Rosenthal became one of the, for some time, the biggest suppliers of Indian pearls. And that's how he got the market. So he was filthy rich and he spent infinite budgets on philanthropy, on different kinds of charities, including the support uh, of Russian writers. I found this photo of a translated book about the history of pearls by Leonard Rosenthal. I haven't been able to find a lot of like uh, let's say detailed biography, but whenever you look up for Rosenthal, Ivan Bunin would definitely be in the feed because literally Ivan Bunin and his wife they were almost starving, so he saved him. After some time, they would fall out. We don't know exactly why. There was no dodgy biz just because Ivan Bunin didn't like to be told what to do and he didn't like to be criticized and everything. But those money would be enough to, well, for the time they were getting along, this money would be enough to create the conditions so Ivan Bunin would get down to writing some of all the most important literature works that eventually he would be given the Nobel Prize for. That's thanks to Rosenthal. I'm not even mentioning dozens of other Russian poets and writers and artists who were helped by Rosenthal. Okay, let's wrap it up here. I hope this has been interesting. Again, the story about the Georgian government needs a lot more details, and I promise I will be getting to it at some point. Again, at the moment I'm studying it because I'm not from Georgia and I want to make sure I provide the good narrative. Before we switch to the new tour, thank you, Sharon. I would like to share here the links on my website. You can find a bunch of links already. For this weekend, it's fully packed with tours. For the next weekend, I have a bunch of tours there already. I will only share the two links for tonight. So in 2 minutes from now, I will be inviting you to the Communal Apartment Museum in the palace in the heart of St. Petersburg. That's how it works. Yes, exactly. That's not slip of the tongue. That's exactly how it was. And also, there's going to be, after 1 hour break, I will be taking you on a boat cruise in St. Petersburg. So it's time for me to head to the communal apartment. I will be there in a minute. Thank you so much for your interest in my tours, and thank you so much for your support and also for your care for my voice. I'm not sure what's wrong with it. I will see you very soon in the communal apartment. Thank you for everything. I'll see you soon.